The race to the 2026 F1 engine regulations has already begun, and the stakes really couldn't be any higher for any team going into these new regs. When there is engine regulations, it means it could be a huge shakeup for the rest of the grid. Every team will obviously be setting their goals very high to be ahead of one another. And while we do have all the rules on the aerodynamics and teams have started actually getting our first picture from the Alpine 2026 car, the front wing winglet, the engines will be the determining factor on whether the team can actually be fighting for podiums, wins, or they're just towards the bottom. We have a lot to go over as there's a lot of rumors about these teams and whether or not they're hitting those goals. News outlets that are very close to these teams have spoken a lot about the progress of these engines, and we also have the team principals like Christian Horner and Toto Wolff and even Mattia Binotto talking about where they're at on these engine regs and what they expect going into the first season of 2026. Did a video like this about 7 months ago, but much more data to cover. If you're new here, go ahead and subscribe. It would mean the world to me. We're trying to hit that 70K. We're very close, so let's go for it. But let's get started with this 2026 engine regs video. I want to go in order of who I think actually has the most prosperous engine right now and has the best chances of winning in 2026, because we do have details as to how this pecking order is looking as of right now. Obviously, we won't know the full details till Q1 in 2026, but it's nice to talk about and really get a gist of where every team's mindset is going into such a big period for Formula One. It's going to be a massive change from what we have right now. I've spoken about it before, but Audi is expected to have the worst engine in 2026. Mattia Binotto joined the team as recently as 2024 and is really the COO, CEO over there, so he knows exactly what's going on. And he's been a very good engineer in his time. While he hasn't been the best team principal, he's been pretty honest about the teams that he's been on, where they stand, and what is their actual goals in the next couple of years. The Audi/Sauber team, whatever you'd like to call them, they say that there's a mountain to climb to actually get on top of these engine regulations, as the team itself is behind in every department. Their numbers are much lower than the other big teams, so that definitely doesn't help in the contribution to this engine. And while Audi was very good in their other ventures in motorsports, this is a different fish to fry. This is Formula One, the top of the top, and building an F1 engine is like no other. Now, it does help that this is an electrical mainly engine, with it being that 50 split. They do have an expertise in these hybrid power systems, but as a newcomer, it's going to take time to catch up. I do believe them to be the 5th team out of these 5 when it comes to engine regulations. The other team is the Red Bull Ford team, as I do think they will be 4th in this pecking order. Christian Horner has spoken a lot about it. They could be inching up to that 3rd spot. It's very close between those two, in my opinion, from everything that I've heard. But Christian Horner has called this the hardest challenge for Red Bull that they've ever faced in Formula One, and that's pretty bold considering where they started from when they were that Jaguar team before Red Bull. This will be completely new, and they have retained a decent amount of people from Honda. One thing they don't have that hasn't really been spoken about in these engine regulations is their fuel provider isn't a very known name like your Aston Martin, Honda, Ferrari, and Mercedes, who all have very important fuel providers that I will be speaking about in detail when I do get to them. Now, Mobil 1 will be with Red Bull, which this fuel provider isn't a slouch either. A lot of people know of Mobil 1, a very big provider for that of NASCAR, and has been on the Red Bull car since 2017. But from the reports read, Petronas, Shell, and Aramco have all been big factors in these 2026 engines, and I haven't really read too much about Mobil 1 and what they have done during this regulation period. It could all be obviously silent, but it was worth mentioning. He also talks about that the factory that they built was built in 4 years, while there's 75 years of experience for Ferrari and 30 years of experience with those Mercedes high-performance powertrains. So, as he says, there are no illusions as to where they can be in the pecking order. Max Verstappen has commented plenty of times in this 2026 engine saying that they don't really know where they're at, and that right now they're not at the level of Ferrari and Mercedes. That has been spoken about multiple times. But the team that I believe to be P3, which is that Honda team, hasn't really said much, but we have a good gist off of news outlets and really the rumors surrounding the team. They've just gone through a bit of an overhaul with putting Andy Cowell as the main guy, which I felt like should have been done a very long time ago. For most people, Andy Cowell is just a name, but this guy was a big success to Mercedes while he was at the team, specifically in the engine department. This guy is fantastic, and Toto Wolff was even worried about Red Bull picking up. He was very glad that Aston picked him up over Red Bull. obviously because Toto loves the Red Bull team. Honda has now made a very good engine for the previous regulations and the current ones we're in right now before going into 2026. They're excellent in their hybrid technology. They've specifically been the best engine in ERS deployment, which has played a big contributing factor to that car being extremely good in the straights. And they are working with new people now with this Aston Martin team, so they quickly got to establish synergies, which Andy Cowell has definitely been working on. The team has spoken about that 2026 might not be their goal for victories, but it will be 27. 26 will be that big stepping stone, which worries me in the slightest because every team is working towards the goal of winning in 26. But Andy Cowell, he's a guy that knows it all. I don't really doubt his abilities. I do believe that Red Bull and Aston Martin are pretty close. I do think the next two teams are the ones that are leading this curve of the engine regulations. Ferrari is a team that I want to discuss in P2, but this is a very close P2. Now, Honda can be very close as well to this P2. It's very up in the air. Ferrari's almost been just as silent, but there are so many more insiders at Ferrari than there is at Aston Martin, so there's much more that we can go upon. A big thing going for the team is that the current PU they're actually using does have a similarity to that of the 2026 one, and every other team is not using it the way that Ferrari is. Let me explain. So every power unit has a single turbo. Now Ferrari is the only team that uses a traditional setup while everyone is using a split turbo type. The split turbo is actually being outlawed for the 2026 regulation, so everyone will have to switch to this setup except for Ferrari. Now the split turbo, it allows for better packaging and slightly lower intake air temps, but the disadvantages are that it's heavier and more complex. The team is also known for being very good in those slow corners as the turbo turns on much quicker than for other cars. And while this won't be a game changer for Ferrari and really put them towards the top, it's very helpful as to making this engine. In any engine regulation period, Ferrari has always been known for having the most power because their raw engine performance is typically at the top, whoever has been the team principal in whichever regulation period, with the exception of the start of 2014. Reliability has been a big problem for them in these engine regulation periods. We saw it in 22, we even saw that in the beginning of the turbo hybrid era. But as we know, Ferrari has came back plenty of times. They do have Shell as their fuel provider, and I didn't really talk about it with Honda, which I forgot to mention, but Aston Martin has Aramco as their fuel provider, which I think is a big contributing factor in these 2026 engines, as fuel adds a lot more performance than you would believe. Aramco, extremely big. Shell has obviously been with the team for years. They are also a very big provider of fuel to Formula One. So this will help a lot, and why I believe 3 and 2 are Honda, Aston Martin, and then also Ferrari at P2. But at P1, the team that's spoken the most about these engine regulation periods and where we have the most data is the Mercedes team. Now, even Toto Wolff himself has said, don't know where we are. This is the first time that I've heard him actually have some type of negative reaction to these regulations. As he said multiple times, they're doing very well. George Russell has spoken about these engine regulations being perfect for the team as they have so much experience to go off of and that the engine is working perfectly and they're hitting all their goals. Toto Wolff even says certain expectations we're meeting, that's good. Others, we're still pushing to achieve our targets, which is normal. Every team is trying to do that. There isn't a way to know that Mercedes will come out on top, as Toto Wolff has stated now multiple times. Mercedes does have Petronas, and as I mentioned it with Ferrari and Aston Martin, I'm going to bring it up again. These fuel providers will play a big part as to whether these engines will work correctly and flow really nicely in these 2026 regs. And Petronas is obviously one of the biggest oil suppliers in the world. Aramco, Shell, Petronas, those are all big companies to look out for that will be big contributing factors to all of these teams. Williams has even brought up the exceptional job that Mercedes has done. And Alpine, from joining the team, they've already stated that they think they can be on the podium 50% of the time in 2026, which is a pretty ridiculous goal set out for a team that is very inconsistent, but it tells you that they have a lot of positives going into this engine regulation period, which if you looked at Alpine about a year ago when the Renault engine was supposed to be in 2026, I don't think these goals would have been set out for that team. And while it is all speculative and rumors, I'd love to hear your thoughts on in the comments below. I really do believe it's closer than expected, which is a good thing because at first I was thinking Mercedes was running away with it, but from all these reports and everything that I've read from the insiders and the news outlets, it seems like there might be a bit of a gap between 3 and 2, but that all depends on how Honda can actually correlate with the team as it is a different team now working there. It's not the exact team that went from the 2021 Red Bull, that went from Red Bull straight to Honda. It's a bit different, so you have to synergize well to be able to be up there with Ferrari and Mercedes. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Is Audi sandbagging? I really hope so. It'd be really sad to see them come into the sport and not actually perform. But please leave a like, subscribe. It would mean the world. And peace.